Now, I know it's on one hand when people hear this that triad or that personality, it seems like there's nothing good that can come out of it. Could you mention some of the things that
Yeah.
would require us embodying this kind of personality so that people don't take advantage of us?
Well, it does enable bad things like callousness, and it does enable
Right.
impulsivity, which is problematic. But it also enables what they call fearless dominance. Some of the most impressive feats of bravery that have ever occurred, like breaking speed records and war and things like that, are a function of psychopathy, in the sense that it's the ability to not be overwhelmed by your fear, by your emotional systems around fear. I'm going to stand up, because if you don't have these traits at all, you're basically just a pushover in all things.
Right.
I'm going to stand for what I believe in instead of being taken, right? Being taken for granted, being washed over. Is to defend not just things you care, like not just ideas, but people you care about. And so evolutionarily, it's probable that these pathological features of psychopathy weren't even around. That these positive features of psychopathy, like protecting one's group, like James Bond does, for example, this is where the origin of these traits really comes from. The fact that empathy shuts down rational thinking processes, and it allows this part of your brain to make tactical, pragmatic, utilitarian decisions.
Hi everyone. How's it going? If you're watching us for the first time, I want to say welcome. I'm Victor Counted, and today this is a Flourishing with Victor Counted. Today I'm excited about our guest. He's not only a friend but also a colleague that I've also worked with for some time, and I'm really excited to have him here. Now, with no further ado, I just want to introduce our guest. It's Dr. Peter Jonason. Now, some know him as Kyle, but that's a special name for special people in his life. But we're really excited to have Peter here, and I'll let him to introduce himself, and we can then go from there. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Victor. Well, how to introduce yourself, how to do it and not sound narcissistic at the same time. It's such a dilemma. So I was born in the States, educated in the States, PhD in social psychology back in 2009, and I got into research in the field of personality more than social psychology, and I was able to capitalize on the emergence of this new topic in particular called the dark triad, which has now been extended to be the dark tetrad. And by bibliometric analysis, at least, I'm the most cited researcher in the world on the topic. It doesn't mean I do the best work or I'm anything special. I'm just very good at being quick and publishing many articles. And so I am a personality psychologist using often evolutionary and psychometric methods to understand the nature of these traits, the origins of these traits, the developmental trajectory of these traits, but also the outcomes of these traits.
Thank you. Thanks, Pete, for that introduction. Something I wanted to mention also, Pete is also a professor of psychology at the University of Padua. Is that what it's called? Padua in Italy. Just wanted to mention before that he was in Sydney, at Western Sydney University, which was a university where I did my PhD, and I think he was a faculty then as well then. And he was one of the people that always inspired me in many ways with his research productivity and panache, and it's been wonderful to have Pete on this platform. Now, also, I wanted to mention you're currently still the editor of Personality and Individual Differences.
About a couple of months ago, I actually resigned. I had been doing it at work. I had been an editor for 10 years and a reviewer before that. And so, it's time to pass the torch at some point to other people. And, as you know, one of the important things about the ways in which you get promoted is doing service for the field. And if I occupy this position, or if senior academics occupy these positions forever, it undermines the success of juniors. But it probably has some impact on science, though. Older people tend to be not just physically slower, but they're less intellectually willing to adopt and adapt to new ideas. And so to bring into the future, you need the future. And so the journal is struggling, as a lot of other journals are, with things like open science and things like that. And that's really something that for the next generation. I mean, I'm only 45, but I've been doing this for long enough that I'm basically an old man. In terms of the academic game.
Right. I think you've had an impressive profile. I think probably around more than 30,000 citations. Like, it's impressive and incredible. Now, I wanted to, what's your take on the whole open science movement? What's your, because I know that the conversation will also come up over and over. I kind of sit on the fence with it, but at the same time, I see the need for that. But whether or not it will solve the problem, it's another thing. But I like to hear what you think.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. In scientifically this way, I'm a bit conservative. So there's a claim, an implicit claim that's made that these open science practices, pre-registered reports, pre-registered hypotheses will somehow decrease questionable research practices or increase reproducibility. And I'm not sure if that's the case. And in fact, it just seems to me that it slows down the process in terms of submitting. There's all these extra auxiliary things you have to submit with papers now, all these other things that are kind of meant as procedural stopgaps to the problems. And to me, the problem in our field is not one of dishonesty, because there's this implicit thing that the reason we have all these findings that don't reproduce is because people were lying. I think that's a very lacking in the principle of charity in how we interpret and how we deal with our colleagues. It's most likely that our colleagues are honest and they make just reasonable mistakes. But I think the nonsense in the field is a function of our lack of ability to rally around a small number of high-order theories that will organize our thinking. They will exclude some questions. They will exclude some methods. But we don't like to do that in psychology. It's a field of diversity more now than ever. And we try to include every possible hypothesis. So I wouldn't be able to, without probably getting in trouble, telling a student that astrology isn't true at this point in the academic game, even though the evidence is overwhelming that it isn't true. There's this sense of we must include, and so the good theory excludes stuff, and it says these aren't questions that are worth asking, like how does a person communicate with a plant? I mean, you could ask the question, but what value does it give us? Why is that useful information? So to me, our problem is not one of these procedural stopgaps, because I don't think that will solve the problem. Instead, what people do is they find ways around them. Anytime the police figure out a way to catch a criminal, criminals figure out a way to work around the police. I mean, it's a great line from Dr. No, from James Bond, where the criminal says that the criminal has to be, Dr. No, the criminal has to be smarter than the policeman because he has to outthink the policeman. So let's not treat our colleagues like criminals, and let's encourage instead kind of theoretical consolescence, a theoretical coherence that will, I think that will deal with the reproducibility, replicability problem better.
Thank you for that take, because I think science have always been like that, especially when there's a new paradigm shift. And I think one of that in the field of science now, it's the whole open science debate. And that's most people would argue that that's a need, that the current paradigm that we have doesn't serve us well. Now we need to take a new turn. And you have a lot of people pushing for the whole open science debate and why that is important.
I think it's nearly a cult, though, Victor. It's nearly a cult, the way in which people follow these things. And what's worse is that journals and editors aren't all on the same page. And so you could submit an article and have a reviewer who is an open science adherent and impose her or his rules on you, and you can't get the paper published unless you follow their version, right? Their perception of this is how good science is. You must have all your hypotheses pre-registered. You must have all your data to be publicly available. These kinds of thinking, and this is anti-scientific thinking, right? To me, the better approach is, look, if you don't trust, if you don't trust a finding that I have, if you think it's wrong, good science is you do the study and show me I'm wrong, right? Do the study better.
I'll send you the data.
You could do that, but barring me sharing the data, because my data, maybe it's a fluke, right? So let's say you don't like a finding that I have. You know what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to show me with your own data and improve it. Science is supposed to be this incremental process, but we've somehow become children, and we're unwilling to be patient enough to say, okay, I don't agree with what Peter Jonason said. I have no personal grievance with him, but I'm going to do a study to show that he's wrong. And that's totally legitimate. But now it's this kind of alarmist Twitter mob stuff where if someone doesn't like a finding you have, instead of doing the science, they just go to Twitter and they say, this is wrong. You're associated with a Catholic university or some nonsense. It's like, that's not how scientists, it's like, where are the adults in the scientific conversation? We've all become petulant children, it seems.
And sadly, that's actually what's happening. I have a friend of mine, just for his privacy, I wouldn't want to mention his name, who has had or still having the same kind of issue, just because I think he had put down his name on some agreement or something, and one of the scholars or colleague in another university picked that up and like went on Twitter, like putting the guy on blast and even questioning his scientific credibility. And this is someone that you can't literally you see the work he's done, and you can't but really recognize the talent. It's unfortunate. But let's kind of come back to personality, and why personality for you? What was the interest?
I would love to give you some deep scientific, story or something. But you're in the States now, and the way when you get your PhD in the States, you get to teach also. And I was asked to teach for just by sheer fluke. I was asked when I was getting my PhD to teach personality psychology. I didn't know anything about personality psychology. I wasn't even educated as an undergraduate in psychology. So I didn't like psychology as an undergraduate. I thought of it as just therapy and feelings. I was very hostile towards it. So I didn't know anything about personality. So they asked me to teach this class. And I taught it, and it's just suited me so well that it very quickly became, no, this is what I'm good at, right? This kind of stuff. And so it allowed me, I was brought into it by accident, but I think it also then jived with my predispositions, my personality, if you will, to seeing the world in terms of there are internal biases in us, personality traits, dispositions that carry us from situation to situation that can be affected by, but are relatively robust to only the strongest, most powerful social events, right? That the authoritarian person is still authoritarian, whether or not life is good or bad. And I liked this approach because I think I implicitly objected to the naive behaviorism that I had learned about when I was an undergraduate. But also, as an evolutionary psychologist, dispositional biases are very important to understand, because they would these biases would be systems that may have evolved to enable us to survive and reproduce.
Right. What do you think, since given the fact that you mentioned how personality kind of shapes us, do you think it's personality shaping the way we think, or it is the other way around?
Wow, yes. So the standard line here is that personality is the driving force behind, say, thinking styles and affective display, affective biases, and all these things. Right. A small minority, including myself, I think we would say the other way around, that the lower order features of our brain, of our mind, are things like thinking bias, cognitive biases, right? Like thinking styles, if you will, empathy as another one, motivational priorities, These are the things that are the basic units that recombine to give us what we call personality. Because if you think a little bit more about what we measure with personality, we ultimately are just measuring something we could call a behavioral syndrome, which is a repeated pattern of behavior. So a person who's narcissistic engages in a pattern of behavior reliably that we call narcissistic. Now, what makes that person narcissistic is experiences and all that. But cognitively, up here, what makes them that person are, for example, biases towards power, right? A desire to be recognized, a desire to be popular, maybe to a Freudian, a little bit of insecurity as well, if you take like vulnerable narcissism into this equation. So there's a theory by a guy named Bob Hogan in particular. It's called socioanalytic. So not psychoanalytic, but socioanalytic. And we've done some of his colleagues and I have done some research showing that, for example, the traits like narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism are linked by, for example, perceptual biases of the world. So people high on these traits in neutral stimuli, they see more aggression. They see adversity when none exists in the picture, but they see it there because their brains are kind of wired to look for adversity. Now, of course, the other thing they look for is sex. So the motivating, the kind of perceptual biases in these people are mating opportunities and adversity opportunities. And those translate then into the larger display we call of psychopathy, but also then the lower order downstream things that we associate with psychopathy, right? The aggression that we associate with psychopathy, the promiscuity we associate with psychopathy, the callousness we associate with psychopathy. So that's what I think we had it backwards. But most personality psychologists have the model of personality is the starting point, like the big five, let's say. It is the starting point, and that then generates behavior, right? So in terms of racism. So the big five predicts racism. Now it correlates with racism. But what's making the psychological systems, the pattern of behavior that we call extroversion, let's say, something is making that, like dopaminergic systems. So biases in dopamine processing underlie the behavioral pattern we call extroversion. So I would say that extroversion, like narcissism, is not really a personality trait per se. It's more of a pattern of behavior, but it's too complex to talk about it this way with say lay people. It's just, psychopathy is a personality trait. It's just easy, right? But conceptually, it matters because the causal order is what's in contention here.
It's interesting because I think this month in the U.S., I'm learning about a lot of traditions. I think this month is like the Black History Month? I think that's what it's called in the U.S. It's interesting you mentioned racism as a behavior. I wanted you to kind of unpack that a little bit from a psychological lens.
Sure. I mean, I think I'm being very general. In a way, racism or prejudice are attitudinal systems that predict discriminatory behaviors. But in terms of the causal process, you have to have attitudes and behavioral intentions. So according to the theory of planned behavior, having just the attitude to be racist, for example, is insufficient to engage in discriminatory behavior. Like, I don't even have to even like Black people to be in favor of, to promote some policy, for example. So the behavioral intention, that's really important. But there's this causal chain, and what you get is a narrowing scope with every variable, right? So personality is very broad. So narcissism is very broad. It then predicts a particular attitudinal system, which is kind of broad, but it's a specific attitude about something, right? Let's say we use attitude towards Black people in America, right? Then that predicts behavioral intentions, the things you're going to do, and then those behavioral intentions predict the behaviors. So there's this whole causal line that has to happen to get you there. And so this is one of the reasons why, if you were to link, say, personality with actual discriminatory practices, you would get a rather weak correlation, because all those little steps in the middle are more highly correlated with each other. So the conceptual distance between these 2 points and these 2 points is larger. So the correlation between these two is larger than this. So you're adding up over time, but the total is not so great. indirect effect is weak. It's the direct effect is weak. It's the indirect effect that matters.
Yeah, what are some of those direct effects that could serve as mediators in that particular context?
Yeah.
Not often talked about, especially it's easy to say that people that have this kind of that triad or this kind of personality trait might be more predisposition to act in a certain way, having a certain racial attitudinal kind of tendencies. But what are some of those indirect mechanisms that are not often accounted for?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's usually the case that it's not. There is an unfortunate degree of that's called simplicity, naivete, and as my colleague Marcin Zajkowski in Warsaw would say, consideration of mechanisms. So the two most popular mechanisms to predict at a close level, at a proximal level, not because personality traits are considered distal, an proximal level are social dominance orientation and right-wing authoritarianism. So it turns out, interestingly, that let's just call it racism, just to be easy. Okay?
And these two variables actually also correlated somehow with narcissism in some sense.
Yes, that's where I'm going with this, right? So so narcissism and psychopathy predict racism or attitude towards outgroup members, right? And through social dominance orientation. But Machiavellianism seems to predict outgroup prejudice through right-wing authoritarianism. So for Machiavellians, there is a fear of the outsider, the fear of the usurper, kind of factor driving racism. Whereas in the case of narcissism and psychopathy, especially narcissism, I think in particular, it's like this realistic conflict theory, right? And that there's this, I perceive you as a threat to my ability to have the resources I want, the mates that I want, the job that I want, all of this. And so if I perceive you as a threat, a logical outcome, albeit undesirable, is to despise that competitor, right? And so you see this, forget race, you could see this just in soccer teams, in football teams, right? You're the team in my way of our team achieving this success. And so it's not a racism in this case with soccer teams, but there is this enmity between different teams because they're all shooting for the same, Super Bowl trophy or cup here in Europe, some football cup.
Yeah, that's amazing. Realizing that, I guess that sense of entitlement often comes with narcissism, and when you look at it, that's also, it forms part of those patterns and mechanisms that shape those kind of attitudes. Now, especially for those that are not, that are just joining in, or perhaps are just trying to work out what we're talking about. I think we started off with personality. Most of us are very familiar with the big five. But I've always wondered, why did you move to the dark triad? Why did you kind of move there and not stay with the big five, which is equally interesting as well? Or was there like some kind of experience that led you? Because I think you were known as the guy that actually blew up the dark triad psychology, essentially, especially with your deity dozen measure, which was a kind of a cool name. But tell me the story behind that, and these three dimensions of dark psychology, personality mean.
Yeah, so the big five, let's start there, it's the standard language of personality psychology, which means it is a saturated field. And when you're getting your PhD, one of the things you need to learn is to either be able to say something really novel about a saturated field or carve out your own field. Yep. So the dark triad as a concept was introduced before it was a PhD student, but it didn't really take off. Nobody was interested in it.
Right.
And it was actually during my time as a PhD student that I was able to kind of get the ball rolling and really generate some interest in it when I simply made the analogy that people high on the dark triad, which is narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism, when I made the analogy that, we think of these features as criminal features, but someone like James Bond, who we all think of as a hero, is high on these traits. And this really resonated with a lot of people because it was like, oh, it could be good to be a psychopath, right? Like it might be people might not be
success. You might need it to kind of go out there to look for a job. That's it.
Yeah, for example, right? So we know that, narcissistic men are more likely to get, to make more money. Well, why is that? They're more likely to ask. They feel a sense of entitlement, so they ask for raises. The meek person doesn't get a raise because they don't ask. The narcissist, for example, is brave, or at least entitled, and takes that action. So there really wasn't that much going on with the dark triad until 2008 when I presented my first paper at a conference in Japan. And then it was published in 2009 when I was, I think, at my first job in Florida. But I really stumbled into this one also. I have no glory story here. I was talking to my one of my mentors, my now really good friend, Norm Lee, just on the phone one day about narcissism and about how narcissism might serve a kind of adaptive in an evolutionary sense utility, in that it would enable people to men in particular to get more mating access. And so we started putting this study together, and we didn't think it was going to be anything. We were just kind of like messing around a little bit. And I happened to discover this paper by the Dark Triad by Del Paulhaus and Kevin Williams. And I was like, you know what? Why don't I just include? I mean, this is just one of these events of science being luck of the draw, right? I happened to include psychopathy in Machiavellianism, and that's the game changer, right? That moment of me deciding, let me just include it, just in case. And it turned out that it was quite useful to do so. And so I very quickly saw the writing on the wall. My PhD was on kind of sex differences in mate preferences, and I still did it on that. But I really capitalized my time during the last year of my PhD on dark triad stuff. And one of the things we did is we created this scale called the Dirty Dozen. It's composed of 12 items. And it seems to be, we just wrote this chapter, one of my colleagues in Warsaw and I, Magda, her name is, we just wrote a chapter looking at the psychometrics of the scale, say, cross-nationally. And of the two brief measures of the dark triad that exist, it seems like the Dirty Dozen is the best in terms of how it behaves, in terms of its structural properties, reproducing, and the ease at which it can be translated, and this kind of stuff. So it's quite popular. It's probably my most or second most cited article. We use it fairly often for cross-national research because it's only 12 items, but it has some limitations. And then I had a book about this, and it was an edited volume. I had a colleague write the chapter about the Dirty Dozen, so I wasn't biased in any way. And he points out some important limitations to it. But if you don't have a lot of money and you don't have a lot of time, then the Dirty Dozen does seem to do the trick. Why is it 12? Because I like cute names. I like ways of helping people remember things. Is a big part of it? Yeah, and the other reason is...
I wanted to say for those that are listening, if they're not familiar with your work, one of the things that you find as you start to go through your profile is the titles of some of your work. It's usually very fancy and very nutty in some sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And actually, I think you called it Dirty Dozen. Why Dirty? Why that?
Yeah, okay. So, the Dirty Dozen is, of course, a movie.
Yeah.
Right? And so we're alluding to the movie, but it's dirty because it's dirty and dark, right? Like these are dirty traits, right? These people are being dirty dogs, right? That type of thing. And so, but another way of saying it's dirty, and this is an alternative interpretation here, is that it's dirty in the sense that it's a rough measure, because you've taken we have taken really complex, at least historically, really complex features of personality and reduced them to only 4 items for each of them. So we simply can't capture the traditional breadth of psychopathy. Right. Now, what is a core aspect of psychopathy versus what is a downstream consequence is a huge debate in the field of psychopathy proper. I don't really get into that, but we tried to create psychometrically the most efficient way of measuring these traits in the most valid way. So there's always this efficiency and validity trade-off. And I err on the side of efficiency over breadth, if possible.
Yeah, and especially if you're doing a large-scale study where you're studying so many variables, it's easy to just pick the 12 of them and throw it in there.
Yeah, or a longitudinal study, right? Like you're trying to minimize the cost. I mean, now after COVID, it became so hard to get people to volunteer to do research online that now you need money for everything, right? Just a short survey. So, and you know this from our field, we end up in volunteering. We end up getting mostly women who volunteer, and so I, as an evolutionary psychologist, I need participant sex. I need sex balanced samples so I can make the comparisons I want. So,
except you're willing to kind of pay for it, right? Which is why
now you have to pay.
Researchers, go with like big research marketing firms like Gallup, or there's a number of them that like a recent project that I'm a part of. Actually, they're working with Gallup, and it's funny because oftentimes the money for the grant goes to that organizations that the researchers themselves, they're scratching to even get something going. Anyway, but let me not get in there because but for those.
No, I mean, I'll speak to that for just 1 second too, because I'm with you. I put together, I didn't get the grant, but in Italy I put together a 1.5 million euro grant. 1 million of that was data collection. Right? So I'm not getting rich, right? If I got the money, my grandmother thinks, oh, if you got that money, Peter, you'll buy a Ferrari. No, Grandma. Like, I get nothing of this.
Yeah. And the project I'm telling you about, I don't know if you've heard about it. It's called the Global Flourishing Study. It's almost about, they got about $47 or $46 million. And I'm telling you, more than, if not all the money going to data collection. Because we're talking about 22 countries around the world, 250,000 every year for 5 years. So, and it makes you wonder, I guess, the researchers that are doing the research, how are they how are they being compensated as well? But more than that, really, I guess it comes back to the idea why the rationale for trying to trim the scale itself to the point that it's very something within 9, 12 good, 16 okay. More than that, it becomes very challenging, except you're using it in a clinical setting for your assessment. But it's interesting for those that are watching. When we talk about the dark triad, we're talking about 3 things. We're talking about psychopathy, we're talking about narcissism, and also the it's a long pronunciation, Machiavelli. Some people just cut it short. I think that the name Machiavellianism, it's from the guy Machiavelli himself.
Yeah, it's from Italy. It's from the book The Prince. So it was it's a scale created based on these people in the 70s reading of the book The Prince.
Yeah.
And it was how can I say? It had lots of utility in business psychology for a while. It was predominantly a business psychology trait.
Now, I know it's on one hand, when people hear this that triad or that personality, it seems like there's nothing good that can come out of it. But I like the fact that you mentioned that to some degree we need aspects of this personality if we want to do certain things. Could you mention some of the things that would require us embodying this kind of personality so that people don't take advantage of us? Because I think that has implication for flourishing, because we have to realize for us to have a better sense of well-being, there are things that we need to go out to pursue success.
Yeah.
And maybe there are aspects of this dark personality that we need, of course, to some degree. Have you...
Yeah, and the trouble with the words is that they're culturally loaded. So it's hard for people to hear the word psychopathy and think there could be anything positive about it. So this is why you have to back up and think about, well, what is psychopathy enabling, right? Well, it does enable bad things like callousness, and it does enable impulsivity, which is problematic. But it also enables what they call fearless dominance. And so a lot of some of the most impressive feats of bravery that have ever occurred, like breaking speed records and war and things like that, are a function of psychopathy, in the sense that it's the ability to not be overwhelmed by your fear, by your emotional systems around fear, to say, I'm going to push forward, right? I'm going to stand up. Because if you don't have these traits at all, you're basically just a pushover in all things, right? So if you have enough of it, it allows you to not be mean to other people, but to be, this is who I am, right? I'm going to stand for what I believe in. I'm going to stand for my principles here. Because if you don't, then you're just a reed in the wind, and you go the way the wind takes you. But convictions require your ability to sometimes offend people. And so being like, this is what I believe. I know you don't, but this is what I believe. And so it allows you to then, let's say in the workplace, push for a particular agenda, right? I would like a promotion, right? Or even to go out and say, I'm going to try to apply for a job outside of this university or outside of this job, because you say you have the bravery, and the sense of value that says, wait, I think I'm worth more money than this, or I don't like the way that I'm being treated here, so I'm going to do something about it instead of being taken, right? Being taken for granted, being washed over. Another thing it allows you to do, I think, is to defend not just things you care, like not just ideas, but people you care about. Right, so if someone steals my dog, right, if someone tries to take Pedro, my dog, my ability to fight that person, right, to get over the fear of me being hurt, is in part psychopathy, right? Part of that is psychopathy. It's that I'm going to now impose my will on that person who's trying to take my dog, to protect mine. And so evolutionarily, it's probable that these pathological features of psychopathy weren't even around. These positive features of psychopathy, like protecting one's group, like James Bond does, for example, this is where the origin of these traits really comes from. This is why they were useful. So if we're in a situation where we're starving and I have to kill the cute little bunny for my family to eat, my ability to kill that cute little bunny means that my kids eat, and my genes potentially get to the next generation. But if I'm debilitated by empathy, if I'm debilitated by emotions, this is a bit like Paul Bloom's book, Against Empathy, right? That the cult of empathy being the most important thing in the world is actually missing the fact that empathy shuts down rational thinking processes. So the ability to not be overwhelmed by emotion, and then allow this part of your brain to make tactical, pragmatic, utilitarian decisions. That's what these traits can enable in people. Now, that's one. Number two, narcissism in particular, for men in particular, is very good at saying, hey, look at me, ladies, right? It's a trait that enables men to achieve the kinds of things that most women find appealing in the world. An ambitious man, a man with resources, a man who has a friend group, right? Women very much index their choices. If a guy has no friends, this is a deal breaker for a lot of women. This is a huge red flag. So narcissism enables men to form these social groups that enable them to have good reputations, to have status and all these things, and that draws women in as well. So narcissism has a kind of peacock nature to it, right? So I see you there with your blazer, right? Today is Friday for me, and so that means today I'm wearing a suit. That's my narcissism, right? It's meant to tell the world, look, this is a competent man. This man has a nice tailored green tweed suit. He's put together. This is someone to be respected. This is someone to look up to. This is someone to reckon with. This is maybe even somebody you want to date as well. And so the traits have, if you can get past the loaded terms, they enable some features of interpersonal relationships that are essential to all the major aspects of success in the world that we want. Protecting ours, advancing our agenda, getting jobs, being safe, falling in love, protecting my dog, protecting my kids. They can all be useful in the right dose, though, is the problem. When they're super high, it's because these people have experienced conditions that have made the math of being a jerk make sense every day. So if you're living in the ghetto, let's say, right? If you're living in a dangerous area, it makes sense every day to be selfish because every day your life is under threat.
Right. This is really fascinating on many levels because for most people, when they think about the dark personality, it's often something associated to something really bad that we don't need in the world.
Think about what the word psychopathy. It's always from some movie or TV show about serial killers. We always see it as indeed the term psychopathy originated from criminal populations. But when you look at the measures of psychopathy, a lot of the items are just things like the person smokes cigarettes, right? The person engages in risk taking, right? Those are things that people do, but they're not necessarily psychopathic things.
Right. Now, I guess the challenge now is how in spite of that, how can we, because I think it sounds like you're talking about having it in balance, right?
Yeah.
A gauge of meekness or empathy, but at the same time, that personality. How can we achieve that balance? Is there like some kind of research that's been done to kind of capture how we can have the right dosage or things that we could do to have anything from that?
This is you're hitting on one of the issues in our field is that it's so underfunded that these kind of complex studies just haven't been done. So what is the right proportion of psychopathy? And it's probably not so simple as that. It's probable that what makes psychopathy adaptive is when it's in response to conditions and then it turns back off again. Okay? But it's maladaptive when it's a consistent behavior pattern, right? When it's your default system, then it's a problem. It's when I'm under threat, right? I have to protect my girlfriend. I have to protect my dog kind of thing. Right? Then it makes sense. So it's in these little moments that you need it. But if you don't have access to it at all, right? Whether it because you suppress it or because you simply are dispositionally incapable of it, then you've lost. Now, the field tends to fixate on the negative things, the socially problematic things that the traits are associated with. Well, why does it do that? Well, because it's easy. I call it the low-hanging fruit problem. It's so dark people do dark things. Wow, I'm blown away. So the fact, no offense to my colleague Evita in Australia, the fact that psychopathy predicts cyber trolling is a no-brainer because it's a mean person doing a mean thing. This is obvious. What the field has really struggled to do, which is kind of touching on what your question is to actually enumerate and to elucidate what are the positive outcomes. What are the positive things that these traits result in? So we know, for example, that narcissism results in more income for men in particular, for example. But as a rule, the information balance is all on the side of what are the bad things that these people do, right? Cyber trolling, cyberbullying, online dating abuse. I mean, the list is as long as the distance it is between you and I right now. But what are the positive things? No, almost nothing.
As we wrap up, I wanted to ask this question as we wrap up and come to a close. What do you tell someone, a man that recognizes that he definitely has this dark personality on a high side?
Yeah.
Is there a system or intervention or something out there? Or how can the person bring it to the balance?
Sure.
Bring it a bit, to the point where it's not like toxic.
Yeah, I'll give you at least two examples, maybe three examples. One of them is, two of which are scientific. One of which is, there's a work on what's called agreeableness training. And there's a paper published by, I think his name is Hudson in Journal of Personality. And he shows that if you put people through agreeableness training, agreeableness from the big five, if you do a intervention around agreeableness, people's dark triad scores, psychopathy, for example, actually go down. And so if you teach people to be nice, agreeable, they seem to actually, at least experimentally, become nice. The other one, of course, I'm going to talk about dogs because, that's my thing, evidently. They do this in prisons. So you give prisoners, dogs, and it seems to change their nature. Now, does it make them not psychopathic? I don't think so. I think what it does is it decouples the link between their psychopathy and the bad behavior. So I don't think it changes their nature as much as it turns a switch which says the dog needs protection. Right. Therefore, I need to bring it down. And we know this even similar research from with humans and babies. When men hold their babies, it reduces their aggression because the signal of baby is so loud evolutionarily that it forces your brain, for most men, except for only the pathological men, right? It says, wait, this is a big deal here. I have to do something about this. Okay. Now, the other one is a little less scientific, but I think it's really important, especially now in our kind of culture of misandry and kind of man-hating and this kind of stuff, right? Is that men really need other men. Men really need other men to keep their bad behavior in check, especially having an older mentor, right? Having an older man in your life, whether it be a father, an uncle, a sensei, any of this, I think is, and men just like you and I, just having each other as colleagues, as friends, we can help each other. Men really need other men in this process of getting their darkness, for lack of better words, in control, to get it right under wraps, right?
It's about balance, essentially.
We need other men for this. We need dads. We need male friends. We need go play sports, go to the gym with your friend, that kind of relationship.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of, I think, a story in the Bible about Esau and Jacob. So one conceptually was described as the bad twin, and the other one is a good twin. So it's like a balance between the two, because it's important to have the two to kind of operate and live in this world. Now, last question for you, which is something I would always ask all my guests. So what do you think? Do you think that personality, is it good for human flourishing?
Yes. There's almost no doubt that it is, because the world is so complex, and what personality traits seem to do is it allows people to occupy and flourish in the multiplicity of social niches that exist. And so if I am extroverted, I can find niches where I can flourish as an extrovert. If I'm introverted, conversely so. And so I think in terms of flourishing, if you can match your personality with your environment, it optimizes everything. You like with my job, for example, I don't feel like I'm working. Why? Because my situation and my personality match so perfectly that there's no distinction in my mind when I'm sitting here typing a grant application or writing a paper. It's like, yeah, I would do this if you didn't pay me. Right. So yeah, I think the two have to, personality absolutely matters. This personality situation match is the goal, is the route to flourishing.
Thank you, Peter, for this insights. It's been wonderful. And this Flourishing with Dr. Victor Counted, I'm really excited to have Dr. Peter Jonason with me here. And thank you for all the insight, and I hope
thanks for having me.
Have a wonderful day. And those joining us, make sure you subscribe to this platform for more in-depth interviews on flourishing and the different things that will look like for us. And thank you for watching. Bye for now. Hey, Pete, I think this was really great. Really, really great.
Thank you.
Thank you for making the time for this.
2, 1, 0. All engine running.